Let me start by saying that at the time this began, about 3 months ago, my wife and I, along with our 3 children, had been living in this apartment for about 3 months. We're very quiet people, just a lesbian couple with some kiddos, and because we live in the Bible Belt, people tend to give us sort of a wide berth. Both my wife and I also tend to give off a do not fuck with us vibe due to past experiences. Most of the time people don't. So we've been living in a nice townhouse apartment in a nice quiet area of our city, which itself is smallish, minding our own business and going about our lives. I usually got home at around 7 through 8 p.m. at this point, and my wife and I would spend time together with our 2 youngest kids, teenagers, until 9:30 p.m. bedtime. At about 10:30 p.m. my wife would leave the apartment to go get our oldest son from work, and I would settle in for bed myself, as I got up very early for work. This had been our routine for about 3 months, and we were pretty settled into it. So one evening I'm laying there in bed, checking my emails as I try to wind down enough to get to sleep. The light in my second floor bedroom, which is visible from the street/front of the building, is off. Directly below me, right next to our front door, is our first floor bathroom. Weird design, but whatever, where the light is off. The kids are asleep. The dogs, 2 of them, are snoozing at the foot of the bed, and I'm quickly approaching sleep myself. The house is quiet and clearly closed up for the night. My car is in our spot right in the front, also locked up. Somewhat distractedly, I hear a loud, broken-sounding car pull into our parking lot, but I don't pay a lot of attention to it. I know what my wife's car sounds like, and this isn't it. I figure it's one of our neighbors or their guests. A few minutes later, I heard the tapping. It was a very distinctive sound, the sound of fingernails tapping against glass. Immediately, I felt a chill go up my spine. It's the middle of the night. Why would someone be tapping on a window at this time? I laid quiet for a moment, waiting for someone to take a look out their door and go, "Dude, wrong house," or something. But that didn't happen. Instead, the tapping continued. It would go on for a few minutes, stop for a minute or 2, and resume. It was directly below my bedroom, and I could hear it very clearly. Someone was tapping on our bathroom window. Here's where I was stupid. I would love to say that I called the cops and some creeper was arrested, but that isn't what happened. Instead, I texted my wife. It went something like, "Please tell me you got back early and you're tapping on the window, because you suck at jokes." She texted back immediately with something like, "No, I'm on my way now." At this point, I'm seriously creeped out. I flipped on the bedroom light, hoping that it would scare the tapper off, but no dice. The tapping continued. Finally, I slipped out of bed, grabbed a baseball bat from our closet, and crept down the stairs. Again, I don't know why I didn't call the cops. I remember being worried about scaring the kids or overreacting. I didn't want one of the city cops that I work with laughing at me because there was a squirrel at my window or something, so I was handling this myself. The downstairs is still completely dark, silent except for the tapping, and I was careful not to make any noise. I slipped right up to the front door and very quietly turned the deadbolt. It wasn't locked previously because I knew my wife would be coming back and I didn't want to inconvenience her. After this, I peeped through our blinds. Nothing. No one was on the porch. Confused and still freaked out, I went back upstairs. As soon as I turned out the light, the tapping started again. This time I flipped a little. I turned the light back on and called my wife, sort of panicking, still listening to this steady tapping from the window downstairs. She has a cooler head than I do, and told me she was hanging up to call the police. For the 20 minutes or so that it took her to get home, I was huddled on the bed clutching my dachshund, useless beast that she is, clearly, and listening to the tapping. It stopped 5 or 6 minutes before she arrived, and I heard the sound of that very loud, broken-sounding car again. The police arrived a minute or so after my wife and took a report. The cop who I knew chastened me thoroughly for not calling them first, right when it started, My wife did the same. They definitely didn't think I was overreacting, and there was evidence that someone had been there. The dirt in our front garden was disturbed, some plants were crushed, and the bench that usually sits in front of our window had been moved out and away from the front of the house. I was embarrassed, but relieved the cops said they would make sure there was a patrol in the area to keep an eye on things. For the next several nights, there was a police car rolling down my street right about the time my wife left to pick up our son, and then coming back at about 15-minute intervals from then on out. Problem solved, right? Not so much. About 2 weeks later, after the patrols had ceased, I was laying in my bed on my way to falling asleep. It's about 10:45 again, and I know my wife won't be home until 11:30 at least, just because of my kid's work schedule and the drive home. Just as I'm about to fall asleep, I hear the same tapping. This time I sat bolt upright in bed, listened for a second to make sure I wasn't creeping myself out, and called the cops. They arrived about 15 minutes later. The tapping stopped about 5 minutes previous. Again, there were signs that someone had been in the front of our house. Again, they took out a report and began patrols again. I was freaked out, but tried not to be too worried. Our neighborhood was good, a nice quiet place to live. We talked to several of our neighbors. We lived in a row of townhouses, and all agreed to keep an eye out for one another. After about 3 weeks, I figured the problem was resolved. There had been no more instances of window tapping or any other creepy activity around the apartment. It seemed like it had been just a weird, distressing prank, and that whoever it was over it. We were still making sure we were cautious, keeping our deadbolt locked, walking the dogs at night together instead of alone, checking to make sure the cars were locked. But there was no reason to continue to really worry about it. So that night, about 3 weeks later, I was working late. I had a lot of paperwork to do, and I just wanted to knock it out, so at about 9 p.m. I was still there. Everyone else in my building had gone, and had been for the better part of an hour. It was just me. That was totally fine by me. I had locked myself in, set the security alarm, and turned off the unnecessary lights in the office. I wasn't worried, as I had done this many times before with no problems. I felt completely safe. I was also about 40 minutes from home. That was the length of my daily commute at the time. I'm not sure what time it was exactly, somewhere between 9 p.m. and 10 p.m. I'm hanging out in my office, tapping away on my computer, my back to the floor-to-ceiling windows behind me. They don't open and have blinds as well as curtains, but you can see the windows themselves from the front parking lot. At that point, I hardly noticed the windows. I had decorated them when I set up my office, put down the blinds, and promptly forgot about them. At least until I heard the tapping. Fingernails against glass. And this time it was directly behind me. Needless to say, I flipped a little. I almost turned over my desk chair getting out of the office and called the police from one of the interior offices with no windows. The entire time I'm waiting, which was about 10 minutes, I'm hearing this tapping. It wasn't just in this one area, but moved around the windows on the front of the building, and it echoed in the empty halls, and was generally creepy as fuck. When the police arrived, they told me it was okay to come out, and I met them at the front door, which was still locked, the security system still armed. They checked the perimeter of the building, the back door, the other offices, but there was no one there. Just disturbed plants and dirt in the garden that runs along our building's front and smudges on the glass. They waited while I locked back up, walked me to my car, and then followed me out of the parking lot and until I hit the interstate. After that, everything seemed to stop. There have been no more instances of window tapping, either at home or at my office. Last week, for unrelated reasons, we moved to a new house much closer to my work and in another city entirely. I've gone back to sometimes working late, but I also asked for my office to be moved to the back of the building, on the second story, where my windows aren't accessible at all. So far, everything is quiet, and I'm hoping it stays that way. This took place when I worked at a local Walmart about 5 or 6 years ago. I was 21 at the time and had already been working in Walmart for more than a year, so I had my share of experiences with questionable and some pretty scary customers. But there was one customer who burned into my memory that I will never forget, and probably changed my life forever. It was a weekday, so it was fairly slow. I was working alone in the girls' clothing department and focusing on tidying up my area, folding clothes, organizing hangers by size, etc. I had only been about 30 minutes into my shift when a gentleman began passing me and started to slow down. I saw in my peripheral vision that he was looking in my direction, so I looked over expecting him to have a question. What I instead got was him saying, through a painfully wide grin, "Hey baby," followed by a kiss blown in my direction. I furrowed my brow and pursed my lips in confusion, unsure of whether he was just trying to be funny or was truly that god-awful at wooing women. He made his kissy face for what was probably a full minute, and while I studied him awkwardly, I couldn't help but realize his sense of style seemed to be very heavily influenced by that guy Pauly D from Jersey Shore. Same hairstyle, clothing style, the whole shebang. It was actually kind of amusing. After blowing his puckered kisses, he moved along, and I continued my work. For the next hour, I saw him pass by, in the same direction many more times. At least 6 through 7 that I could count when I was actually paying attention, and the first 2 times he did the same thing, calling me baby and blowing his kisses. It started to get obnoxious after the 3rd time, so I moved farther into my department and faced the opposite direction when I saw him passing. He responded by changing his path and was now walking directly through the neighboring clothing sections, and was slowly getting closer and closer with each passing, as if he were circling in like a shark around my figurative boat. The longer he circled, the more my gut clenched. Eventually, he directly approached me. He reached out and slightly caressed my hair from behind me and held it in his fingers for a couple of seconds. I had very long hair, so he wasn't right up to my face with his hand or anything, but still, ew. I turned around to see him holding my hair, and I took it back into my hands, wide-eyed. "You have very beautiful hair. You're so beautiful." "Thank you?" I didn't want to snap due to fear of getting myself in trouble, and plus since I was deeper into my department, there wasn't exactly a lot of other people around that would see me anymore, and I didn't want to set him off if I got an attitude. I started to slightly shake with mild anxiety and felt my face get hot as my blood pressure rose. My gut was screaming at me that something was seriously wrong with this guy. Again, he carried on walking without another word, but he winked and blew another kiss. It was then that I realized that the cart he had had with him only had 2 items in it. So he had been circling my area for more than an hour, and most likely wasn't even truly shopping. For general merchandise or food anyway. I decided this was a good opportunity to take a break and ran off to hide in the break room for the usual 15 minutes I was given. While I was in there, I saw my coworker and good friend Chris come in, and I told him briefly about what was going on. Mainly just that a guy had been circling around me and calling me baby, but that was all I could squeeze in before I had to go back to my post. He expressed that he found the guy creepy, and told me that he was due to clock out in a couple of hours, so he'd come check on me on his way out to see if the guy let up. 2 hours seemed like more than enough time for him to leave, right? I mean, maybe he was already gone since I wasn't in my department for those 15 minutes anyway. Well, I didn't necessarily see him. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting him to come from behind me. I even kept my hair over my shoulder in front of me so it wasn't flowing down my back anymore, and I became more and more paranoid as it started to sink in that this complete stranger just made physical contact with me in a way that I wasn't comfortable with, and I wasn't sure if he would do it again or do worse. The unknown was frightening. I kept working in this anxious state as I made my way over to the girls' jeans shelves and began removing wadded piles of jeans to fold. That's when I saw him again. He was behind the shelves, watching me from there for God knows how long, An hour and a half is a long time if not physically seeing him, but realizing he never actually left the store like you'd hoped. When I saw him, I let out a short gasp, dropped the jeans and backed up with my hands to my chest. He gave a shit-eating grin with a sly chuckle. He walks around the shelf and asks, "Did I scare you?" "Yeah, in fact you did." I heard the fear in my voice this time, and I'm certain he did too. He apologized, but he didn't leave. He instead asked me questions he had no business asking. I gave every single one with a vague or sarcastic answer. "What time do you get off work?" "Not soon enough." "Where do you live?" "Not around here." "Do you like to hang out anywhere after work?" "Anywhere that's with my boyfriend." "How long have you been with your boyfriend?" "A long time." Eventually he realized I wasn't giving him the desired information he wanted, so he moved along once more, but this time saying he'd be back later. I took out my phone to check the time after this, and that's when everything dawned on me how much worse this was than I initially thought. He had been there for almost 3.5 hours. Not only was his dedication scary enough, but what was worse was that I was only working a half day, meaning my shift was over in less than an hour, and I was truly and utterly afraid that he was going to follow me to my car, or worse, home. As I looked at my phone in horror, almost as if I physically called him, Chris came by after clocking out as he'd promised. My face was bright red, and I felt as though I was going to have a panic attack. I told Chris that the man was still here, and he was getting worse. I told him everything as fast and quietly as I could in case Polly Wannabe came back before I could finish. "Chris, I don't know what to do. He's still circling me like a shark and watching me from behind the shelves. He was asking me a bunch of questions I didn't want to answer, and he's wondering what time I'm off work. Chris, he fucking touched and caressed my hair. I don't know what to do. I have 30 minutes left on my shift and I don't know what this guy is capable of or what he's planning. I don't even know this guy's name. I'm scared and I don't know what the fuck to do." Chris asked which way the guy went so he could see him for a description, and I told him that if he waited a few minutes he would come back on his own. So he did, and he tried to distract me with a normal conversation to calm me down. And about 5 minutes in, here he comes. I told Chris to act normal and told him that the guy was coming up to my right. We kept holding our conversation as Chris casually glanced over. I held a fake smile for a moment as though our conversation was going ever so well, and I looked over with my eyes. Polly Wannabe was glaring at Chris. Daggers that could cut thin air locked in his direction, turning his head as he passed by. Chris played dumb as if he didn't notice, and said out loud that he was going to grab his stuff and turned to head back toward the back room, despite the fact he was on his way out the door. After Chris left, my creepy admirer came back as though he were waiting for that, bumping me slightly with his cart, asking me if that was my boyfriend. I told him that he wasn't, although I probably should have lied now that I think about it. He began asking if I could get him a job there. What? And started asking me questions about what I usually do, what departments I work. Again, I gave vague answers. Not that it would do much because no matter where exactly I am at work, I'm still somewhere in the building and could be found rather easily. As he's holding the Q&A, I see 2 managers, a man and a woman, walking into my department as Chris passes by giving me a reassuring nod that Polly Wannabe didn't see. The managers just stood there, watching us. I looked over at them with a cry for help in my eyes, and they inched closer. The creeper took notice and turned to me, silent for a moment. "Am I getting you in trouble?" The last words I spoke to him were, "It's not me that's about to be in trouble." The jig was up. He left his cart, that still had the same 2 items in it, and power walked out of the store. The managers came up and asked me if he was bothering me, and I told them everything. The shark circling, the watching behind shelves, the uncomfortable questions, the hair touching, everything, and topped it off with the fact that it went on for what was now almost 4 hours. They told me they would check the cameras and see if they could get a good shot of his face so security could keep a record of the incident in case he returned. Also to see if he bothered anyone else. They then asked one of my managers to walk me to my car after my shift, and to wait until I pulled out of the lot before returning indoors to make sure I wasn't obviously being followed. I made it home safely and without issues, but the fear still lingered. I could never return to work without the paranoia again. I worked there for a little more than another year and he never ended up coming back. That I saw anyway. But I never forgot him. I kept constantly looking over my shoulder when I worked alone and feared that he'd return. And any time the fear began to disperse, I had nightmares that would remind me of him. Those nightmares came and went until about 2 years ago. Even though I know the situation wasn't as bad as it could have been, my overthinking and anxiety kept repeating, "What if?" and making me think about what he could have possibly had planned had he succeeded at sticking around until I left for the day. It affected my ability to go anywhere in public alone, even to this day. After the nightmares finally stopped, however, I was in for a surprise that I may not have been overthinking things as much as I had thought, that my gut feelings were correct. His mugshot showed up on my newsfeed in July of 2017. The local sheriff's office was looking for him and found him shortly after. He was wanted for stalking. Apparently going to businesses and picking out women to hang around, watch, and harass was a hobby of his. Exposing himself to women, masturbating in front of a store where he was watching women work through the window, grabbing a woman's breast, and grabbing a woman between the legs. He pleaded no contest to these charges. As I looked at his mugshot in disbelief, I took the opportunity, now having his name, to look into his criminal history. On top of the most recent charges I just listed, he had been arrested for many counts of different types of battery on people of different ages, one being older than 65, which is really low, and at least one count included him being armed. But the charge that hit me the hardest was that about a year before my encounter with him, he was charged with kidnapping. Whether or not something of that nature had been planned for me, I may never know, but I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I consider myself very fortunate that I didn't have it as bad as the other poor souls he was able to get his hands on, thanks to Chris and the managers that watched over me. Why this man was able to walk free so long despite his consistent disgusting actions is a mystery, and I don't know what his sentencing was last July. But if the justice system lets him roam once more, all I can say is that I hope we never meet again. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and share it with your friends, as well as hit the notification button and make sure you get all of the notifications for the channel. And if you would like to help support the channel, make sure you check out that sponsor button down below, as well as Patreon. You can find a link in the description. Both of them have their own perks, so you can go ahead and look into that. But for sponsors, you get custom badges and all that kind of stuff for YouTube, specifically. It's worth looking into if that's your type of thing. I hope you enjoyed these creepy stories. Both of these were found on the subreddit Let's Not Meet, and the Stalker story was actually verified by the moderators of the subreddit. So it actually seems like stalking's crazily a normal thing we have around nowadays. Not so much guys getting stalked. Actually, I guess that's happening a lot more often as well. Regardless, the point I'm getting at is, do any of you have your own stalker stories? Me personally? No, not really. I've never had a stalker, which is pretty cool. Knock on wood. I don't have any wood here. Knock on my head. That might as well be knocking on wood at that point, you know what I'm saying? Yeah. But I do know that I'm always worried about my wife, like, around, out and about it, especially some of the places that we used to live around. Not so bad here, but, like when we lived in Oregon, that place was horrible and there would be, like, creepy people. But she worked at the Walmart there too. Funny the people at Walmart you meet, right? I guess the police came one night and there was a dude smoking meth naked in the back by the fish section. Man, the people of Walmart, I'll tell you what. He wasn't stalking her or anything, you know, he was just trying to be a fish or something. I don't know. I don't really know what he was doing. Maybe, I think he was like wanking it. I don't know. I guess maybe there's a thing with wanking it at Walmart. Anyways, I'm kind of off topic. I appreciate you checking out this video, and I will catch you in the next one. And just remember, it's always scarier if it's true. Bad bye.